think it fits your theory, though.
Hold it. The spirit within us is brand new, never existed before in the animal kingdom on earth. It happened for the first time with Adam. Now, there's parts of us that are not brand new. We have physical bodies, just like the other animals have physical bodies. Therefore, the text doesn't use bara to refer to our physical capacity. It uses the word asa. It still attributes to God the miraculous. God himself performed a miracle of taking the dust of the earth, which wasn't brand new. It's been around for a while.
2 days, right?
Well, okay, whatever you say.
Yeah.
A few days. I agree it's been 6 days. It's been sitting around. So, but 6 long days. But with respect to the Spirit, that's brand new. That never existed in God's earthly creation until the 6th day. Just like with the animals, when it says on the 5th day, God created the soulish creatures. Notice there again, it uses both verbs, asa, bara. There's something about those creatures that is brand new that never existed before.
But before that, there were animals without a soul, without a consciousness of life? Or?
Well, I mean, you're getting into a debate here. What does Genesis mean by the soulishness of these bird-mammal creatures? And sometimes we see in the New Testament, for example, it's connoted with the Spirit, but there it's referring to human beings. You look at the context, I believe what it's speaking about is how birds and mammals are uniquely endowed by God with mind, will, and emotions so that they can form relationships with us human beings. I don't know about your kids, but my kids have had these pet insects when they were young. But they gave up on them because there's no relationship there.
They're dumb.
Whereas with the birds and mammals, they can maintain a relationship. Right. So there is something distinctive about those creatures.
I agree with that. I think we're way off topic for the question that was asked, though. We'll go back to the original one there, John.
All right, let's try it here. My question's about the canopy theory. You've been critical, Dr. Hovind, of Dr. Ross because he makes a lot of use of 20th century science. But I never hear young Earth creationists talk much about the origin of canopy theory. And as best I can determine, it was developed by a man named Isaac Newton Vail. He was a Quaker. He was a self-taught geologist. I'm not sure he was a Christian. He was an evolutionist. He believed the Earth was millions of years old. And this 19th century discredited theory has been embraced by young Earth creationists. Aren't you doing the very same thing that you have criticized Dr. Ross for doing?
Well, first of all, you accused me of being against 20th century science. That is simply not true. I love science. I've seen no scientific evidence to go against this book. I see a lot of 20th century interpretations of scientific facts that are contrary. But again, you're confusing the interpretation that somebody gives to the fact. Here's Grand Canyon. How did it get there? Some guy says billions of years. Okay, now you can't make his interpretation part of the fact that it's there. All we know is it's there. So I'm not against science. I love science, okay? I've not seen any scientific evidence to contradict the young Earth creationist model, an instantaneous creation, 6 days. I've never seen any scientific evidence. I see evolutionary interpretations that contradict that. And there's no question the Bible has a lot of conflict with evolution. And I think the Bible has a lot of conflict with Hugh Ross's teachings. But there's no conflict between science and the Bible. Now,
how do you explain the existence of stars in a young Earth interpretation?
Now, let me finish this question here. Critical of science, as far as the canopy theory, I don't know who invented it. I never heard of this guy you mentioned.
About the book, and I'll be happy to
well, that's fine.
This is a reprint of his book.
The fact is, I read the Bible, and I look at science, and I see several interesting things. Insects are found in the fossil record that are huge. Insects breathe through their skin. There's a real problem as an insect gets larger. It breathes through spiracles in its skin. As you increase the size of an insect, the surface area to volume ratio changes radically. And you have a problem where it can't get enough oxygen. And we find dragonfly. They found one in Italy here recently with a 50-inch wingspan. Well, a 50-inch dragonfly couldn't possibly fly today. Something was different. 2-foot grasshopper fossils are found. 18-inch cockroach fossils. In Germany last summer, this summer, they found an 8.5-foot centipede fossil. Something was different on this planet because insects today cannot get that size because of the surface area to volume ratio problem. They just don't have enough skin to absorb the oxygen they need. Plus the flight. You know, pterodactyls are found with 50-foot wingspan. They couldn't fly today.
All right, sum it up.
Something was different in the atmosphere. Amber is found that has 30% oxygen in it, in the air bubbles. Today we have 21%. Something was different. The Bible says there was water above the firmament. That's all I can say. I clearly state in my seminar, it's called the canopy theory. It's gone, whatever it was. It fell down at the time of the flood. I couldn't prove it. It's just a theory.
You want to comment?
Well, I have in my office a book written by a young Earth creationist. It's a thesis looking at 100 different canopy models. And he admits as a young Earth creationist that every one of them is scientifically flawed, and says the young Earth community right now doesn't have a viable canopy theory. And for the very reasons I mentioned in my book, you can't keep the thing stable.
Refresh our memory then. What are you saying that the text says?
Well, I believe that the text is saying that there was a fully functional water cycle from the second creation day onward. I mean, as I look at Genesis 2, I see two Hebrew words, ed matar, rain and mist. As you look at the lexical definitions, it's simply a matter of degree. One's referring to bigger liquid drops of water, and one's referring to smaller liquid drops of water. And as a geologist friend of mine pointed out, we have fossil evidence of falling raindrops in shale and sandstone rocks that go back before 10 million years. Rain was here. And would also fit the whole idea of the covenant theology. When God uses something to sign one of his covenants, he always picks something familiar within the environment to sign that with, like water baptism or food and wine. And therefore, there must have been rain and rainbows before the flood for God to use that as a covenant signature.
That question.
Okay. This is directed to Dr. Ross. But first, for Dr. Hovind, I have studied Hebrew, and Dr. Ross does an admirable job. He's done his homework. We've talked personally about some of these things, and yet this is directed because we do have some differences. And so, Dr. Ross, in relation to the word yom, used in the Old Testament, 359 times it is linked with a number, a numerical index. All but a few times, like Hosea 6:2, it refers to a literal 24-hour solar day.
Sure.
So the evidence seems to support a 24-hour day. How would you deal with this?
Well, how I would deal with it is to make the point that those 300-plus references you found are in the context of human history. Whereas what you've got in Hosea chapter 6 is a prophetic reference using the word day. What you have in Genesis 1 is a reference towards the natural creation. It's a different context. The other references are referring to human history. So you have to examine the context to see which way you should take one of the three definitions.
And doing that, there is some very good evidence that it is a 24-hour period. Now, you know, as we've talked, that I'm really open to looking at all the options. I want to know the truth. A lot of people listening want to know what is really the case. And you have presented some very good evidence. And we need to spend time sifting through, pooling these things together. And I know for me, yom is still a problem. And I think for a lot of other people. So what would you say that we need to do in seeking truth or good evidence in this area?
Well, you know, I like problems. I like disagreements because it's a wonderful way to learn. I mean, every time God takes a doubt away from me, he gives me 3 new ones I didn't know I had in the first place. I think that's how God teaches us. What I would recommend, we have to stop using the charge of heresy or heretic, because all that does is raise fear, and it shuts down communication. We need to open the communication up. If people will dialogue without these charges of heresy, or you're not a Christian, or you're leading people astray, I think we can get this settled. All it takes is to get people to talk in a peaceable environment where we accept one another's Christian testimony.
One comment I would make, in Hosea chapter 6, when it talks about the day of the Lord, that may be a literal 24-hour day. There is going to be a day when he comes and redeems this world. So to take the 300 references where it's clearly a 24-hour day and say we have one where it's questionable, that one still could be a 24-hour day. And then to build a whole doctrine based on that one questionable verse, I think that's real thin ice to be skating on.
But if you only got one passage in the Bible where numbered days refer to natural creation, that establishes an entirely different context.
Well, again,
that does give you the basis for an exception.
I would go back to what I've said many times. What your interpretation of Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 and Exodus 20:11 and the Ten Commandments, that interpretation requires a guru to come up with that. The average person doesn't read it and say
How
that.
about Genesis 2, in the day that the Lord created? In other words, that day doesn't refer to just one day.
I think it does. I think in Genesis chapter 2, it says, in the day the Lord created the heaven and the earth. That's referring to the first day, and then it goes right on.
Well,
so to assume you're talking about that day, meaning 6 days, I think you're reading into the text right there.
Most scholars would strongly disagree